Hello everyone. Today we'll be discussing a new threat or a new challenge to the internal security of India, and that is cyber threats. So if there is one thing common to all of our contemporary experiences of today's times, it's that the internet has become an increasingly integral part of our lives. We are a part of a generation that witnessed the boom of the internet and of digital technology very early in our lives, and then later we assimilated into it, and now we have become extremely digitally savvy. There are infants that are born today that have some sort of digital intelligence that allows them to know how to browse the internet, surf the web, use digital devices with a lot of competence. There are 2-year-olds who are better with their iPads than full-grown adults. So essentially, of course, it is obvious that the internet has become absolutely integral to our lives, and the networks that are available across the internet have spread into every sphere of our lives. Now, with the COVID-19 pandemic, this became even more intense. As individuals continued to be locked down and isolated in their homes, a large swath of our daily social and economic and political interactions moved online to an unprecedented degree. In fact, as the pandemic relegated individuals into their homes, daily life couldn't stop, social processes couldn't stop. So entire economies, industries, healthcare, governance, politics, education, law enforcement, judicial proceedings, it all moved online. So this essentially allowed the internet to become even more integral to our lives. During the lockdown and the successive phases of lockdown that occurred in India and all around the world, indeed daily life would have absolutely grinded to a halt in the absence of the internet. But that did not happen. Life continued, professional activities continued, education continued in much the same way and with much the same vigor as it did before. In fact, even the fact that I am sitting here talking to you right now is another instance of how important the internet has become to educational purposes as well. So, of course, there are positive consequences of this. There are positive impacts of this. The very first thing is that the internet is a source of absolutely boundless information. There is literally no limit to what can be found on the internet if you just know where to look, if you know what keywords to use. The second thing is that what the internet has done is that it is at its core a democratic resource. It doesn't discriminate between individuals who have access to its information. So this has essentially led to the growth and sustenance and maintenance of an informed and increasingly aware citizenry, which has therefore led to higher rates of citizen awareness, higher rates of good governance, governmental transparency, as well as just general betterment in social situations. So this is on the one side. However, and of course this is more relevant to our discussion today, there are various negative consequences of this as well. The fact that boundless information is democratically available to individuals all across the internet also means that all kinds of criminals and terrorist organizations, organized crime groups, they also have access to this kind of information. They don't not only have access to this kind of information, they also have access to the variety of multidimensional, interdependent, multi-layered networks that the internet provides for them, right? For the purposes of communication, recruitment, mobilization, information sharing, and even financial resource gathering. The ISIS is, for example, a very good example of this, because a lot of their propaganda, their publicity of their nefarious activities, their radicalization, recruitment and mobilization and gathering of resources occurs very publicly or privately over the internet. So why is it so much easier to do these things in this era of the internet? And this is because essentially what the internet allows is asynchronous communication. Asynchronous communication essentially means that when a person sends something over the internet or says something over the internet, unlike synchronous communication, it removes the imperative on the person who's doing things to disclose their real identity, to respond immediately, to even take any form of responsibility for their actions. So if you couple up asynchronous communication with the absolute treasure trove of information democratically available to every individual who has the right tools, then What we have in our hands is a particularly concerning scenario, and that is the fact that there are now new generations of crime that is happening, where terrorists and other nefarious individuals have access and to information that is boundless, and also have access to networks that they can exploit for their own personal use. Now, the third negative consequence of the internet becoming very integral to our lives is also the fact that how important the internet has become to the critical infrastructure of our states and to the critical information infrastructure as well. Now, essentially, what are critical infrastructure? Critical infrastructure are essentially those public infrastructure or civic infrastructure without which a country cannot function. So, we can have our banking, we can have our law and order systems, judicial systems, air traffic control systems, weather pattern control or analysis systems, defense, military architectures, all of these various infrastructure without which a country cannot run. Now, what is critical information infrastructure? Critical information infrastructure are those informational resources upon which these critical infrastructures are based. What does it essentially mean? It essentially means that as the internet has become more and more integral to our personal lives, it has also become more and more integral, obviously because of its ease and its access to the public lives of the country as well. There are now, especially as we know, as I said, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, there are full economies, full banking systems, financial transactions, military installations, all of this happening completely online. So while on the one hand, as I said, there are good things to this as well, of course, because it allows access to a lot of citizens. It has allowed the perpetuation of daily life despite the COVID-19 pandemic. The seriously concerning negative consequence of this is also the fact that if there is any intrusion into any of these, if there is any hacking or any sort of intrusion of criminal individuals or into the cyberspace where these critical infrastructures are dependent, essentially what that would do is that could threaten to destabilize an entire country. It could threaten to destabilize an entire economy. And that is essentially what cyber warfare is. That is essentially what cyber threats are. When there are organizations or individuals or even now we know non-state and even state actors that utilize cyber technology to intrude into either other cyber devices or into other spaces like economies, like politics, like governance to achieve nefarious aims. This is essentially what has been allowed by the spreading of the internet into our everyday lives. We understand that terrorists and hackers have utilized things like fraud, impersonification, economic malignment, hacking, spear phishing, man-in-the-middle attacks, denial of service attacks, Trojans, malware, all of these, various kinds of cyber threats or, cyber criminal activities to intrude into political systems, to intrude into financial systems and cause massive political and economic losses. So, especially when, even the military and even defense facilities have become deeply digital, when there are full nuclear systems and warning systems and aircrafts, all of these things that are dependent on the internet, it becomes even more terrifying what the consequences of a hostile entity looking to injure the stability, sovereignty of the state as well as the peace and security of the citizens. What could the consequences of that be? So, of course, India is aware of this because India has been no stranger to hacking attempts or attacks by illicit hackers that most Indian policymakers believe are generally led by the Chinese state. On 26 November 2021, the Brahma Research Foundation released a report termed National Security 2611 and Beyond, Atmanirbharta Se Hi Atmanirbhar Bharat, which essentially stated narco-terrorism, cyber-terrorism and information warfare as some of the main sources of challenges to the internal security of India. As an addition to this, D. Shivanandan, who is a former Mumbai police commissioner who assumed office after the 2611 attacks, also said that though the 2611 attacks did allow there to be added pressure to more rigidly sophisticate and better our technological infrastructure and our cybersecurity infrastructure. And essentially, cybersecurity are all those actions and policies that are taken to ensure that the security of individuals and of companies and organizations and of states is maintained over the critical information infrastructure. Keshavanandan also believes that the future threat or the future war will probably be a cyber war. It will probably be fought in the cyberspace. Keeping in mind all of these things, you have to also remember that in 2013, the government of India also passed a national policy and a national framework on cybersecurity, where they essentially aided the creation of various institutions such as the National Critical Information Infrastructure Protection Center that would protect all critical infrastructure like banking sectors, financial sectors, the nuclear energy agencies, weather control patterns, air traffic patterns, agriculture, all of the things that are online. The point of this organization and the policy was to build better firewalls around them, to build better protections around them. Now, this is all well and good. There have been a lot of advancements in the developments that the government has taken to better protect and better preserve the cyber security of the country and of its citizens, but it becomes more and more difficult for a variety of reasons. And the main reason for this is because a lot of these illegal, illicit communications and transactions that happen over the internet happen across the dark web. Now, essentially, we understand that the internet is divided into the surface web and the deep web. Now, the surface web is only 10%. It is the bare tip of the iceberg of all the information that is available to any individual who looks into the internet. Now, the dark web is only accessible through browsers like Tor or through other kinds of VPN and anonymous browsing sites. It is in the dark web, which is a part of the deep web, that most of these illegal activities occur. Why is this a problem for the government, or why is this a problem for law enforcement agencies? The basic issue here is the fact that the dark web offers complete anonymity and it offers complete asynchronicity of communication when it comes to individuals essentially interacting with each other. You don't need to disclose your identity. You don't need to disclose any particular thing about yourself when you have to conduct any transactions on the dark web. Secondly, transactions on the dark web generally occur through cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, which essentially is stores a digital ledger of transactions along a network of cryptographically secured records. So essentially what the dark web allows is that it allows individuals, without disclosing anything about them, to conduct nefarious activities like arms trafficking, like human trafficking, selling of drugs, all of these things on the internet, over the internet, unbound by global barriers, with complete impunity, essentially. And because these transactions generally happen with cryptocurrency, there are a lot of regulatory challenges that follow. Now, the first regulatory challenge essentially is the fact that cryptocurrency we don't have any particular laws that deal with cryptocurrency in India yet. Essentially, what that specifically means is the fact that our financial task forces essentially that ensure that there is fairness and legality maintained in financial transactions across India. These don't have the relevant tools to help deal with cryptocurrency and cryptocurrency transactions. In fact, in 2021, when MobiQuick's, Zomato's, Domino's and JustPay's consumer data was sold for crores in Indian rupees over the dark web in cryptocurrency, in Bitcoin essentially, the financial task force really did not have the regulatory tools to do anything about it. The second problem is the fact that all of these sites over the dark web, or all of these transactions over the dark web, they don't remain active for more than 200 to 300 days. So that also really deepens the problem for a lot of government agencies, because they don't have enough time to fully investigate and fully look into this matter properly. The third and most important regulatory challenge is that in the absence of a universally accepted definition of cybersecurity, and in the absence of a proper development of the era of internet governance, what has essentially happened here is the fact that individuals have become, or governments essentially have become, more and more vulnerable to the fact that a lot of the crimes that take place against the state and against the citizens happen outside of national boundaries. So the government, or the jurisdictional challenges here are that the government doesn't know how far does its jurisdiction extend. So in this situation, the only solution for the Indian government is to essentially better its cybersecurity infrastructure by bettering its regulatory infrastructure to better deal with the challenges of the time. Another thing that the government needs to do is also to ensure that that with the generation of more and more interconnected lives of individuals, and the development of mass surveillance programs, the government has to ensure that the security of individuals remains protected. So essentially, this became more evident after the Edward Snowden revelations came out in 2013, which revealed that the USA's NSA, or the National Security Agency, had been conducting mass espionage or mass spying across countries, including India, and India was placed 5th on that list. So essentially what that became clear is what the NSA was doing is that it was using programs such as Boundless Informant and Prism to collect metadata about individuals, about their call records, about essentially, their email addresses and their email activities. So what metadata is that metadata essentially is all the information about what an individual does. It is an information about who they have called, how long they have called for, who they have emailed, what are the exact emails that have come and gone, what are the timestamps on them, what is the duration of them. So even though the NSA essentially, and even the Indian government at that time did not seem to say that it was a proper threat to our cybersecurity or to the personal privacy of individuals, the issue that was raised by several citizen groups was the fact that where there is the collection of metadata, and even what the Boundless Informant was also doing was that essentially even summarizing them and providing them to managers in the NSA, what it basically ensured is that this would essentially act as a repository of all the information of all the individuals on that the NSA has spied on. And the problem with metadata is that it essentially would allow these individuals or these organizations to understand or get a complete picture of the daily lives and the personalities of an individual. So essentially this became an incredible problem when it came to data security and privacy of an individual, because obviously what this kind of development does is that while it allows a lot of these companies to gather information about these individuals, it doesn't place any sort of compulsions on them to be responsible to the individuals from whom they have gathered this data. So essentially with the Snowden revelations, and now essentially with threats of China intruding into the cyberspace, the only solution is that the Indian government has to better the cybersecurity infrastructure and has to basically add more finesse to it to essentially ensure that the balance between internal security and personal privacy is maintained.